Hey, Internet. I'm Wes Mandible, and I just got here. Oh, it is the ripe, early hours of 10:30 in the morning on a beautiful 2/29/2024. Or if you're in Europe, 29/2/2024. Because you guys actually do the thing that makes sense, where you put the day first and then the month. I wish we did that, but that's not really what I'm here to talk about this week. Because let me tell you, I have had the week of all time. Because I watched the new Avatar, The Last Airbender on Netflix. By Netflix and for Netflix. And I thought, what better thing to do this week than to talk about Avatar, The Last Airbender by Netflix. That seems relevant. And I had lots of thoughts and opinions while I was watching it. So what better way to celebrate being a human but then to air my opinions out to the internet, to go take my thoughts and opinions that maybe you didn't know before today and do nothing with them. I sat down 3 days ago to watch the first episode, and I'll be real, I actually didn't even want to watch it. I may have been coerced into watching because I was hearing less than appreciative things about the show. And I was like, well, maybe I don't feel like watching that, because if it's not really like a faithful adaptation, maybe I don't want to watch it. But then I got over my curmudgeonly spirit. But as we embarked on our journey in the South Pole with a brother and sister on their fishing trip, I realized this show might have taken a few creative liberties. Yes. Which actually, I'm going to say right now, like, I watched the first episode and I realized very quickly that if I was going to be put off by the creators making changes, I was going to have to get over that, because they made it very clear from the beginning that things were going to be different. And I don't necessarily want to just watch a shot-for-shot remake. And I knew that going in, that I want to see some things a little different. But that's where the complication comes in, because what I might want to see a little different is very likely to be different from what the creator wants to see done differently. That's where we get into kind of this territory of trying to please everybody, but you really can't please everybody, because even if they had made a shot-for-shot remake of the show, there were still things that would be picked apart by everybody, including myself. There are things where it's like, oh, well, this was kind of not good too, so bad. There's always going to be that group of people where you just can't sate the hunger for more things, more content, more brain food, but not really food, like more like candy, like, you know what I mean. Anyway, this analogy is starting to run dry. You can't please the people that want everything to be perfect because they don't even know what perfect means. And I think while I was watching the show, I was starting to make note of what those things that were being let go were. And overall, as somebody who was a really, really big fan of the show in my younger years, I was actually apprehensive towards them making the show in the first place, because I was sort of in a camp of, what justice can you really do to a show that doesn't need to be adapted, I guess. Which is a completely different take than what I had back when they announced Legend of Korra, because when they announced Legend of Korra, I remember I had just finished rewatching The Last Airbender, and I was on a huge like Avatar kick at the time, just looking for more Avatar stuff to, you know, consume, to douse the flames of fanboyism. And so I remember it was the original little animation clip of Korra fighting, and I was very excited when that show was announced and when it came out. And, you know, opinions aside, I mean, we're not here to talk about Legend of Korra. Maybe that's a topic for another day. But in terms of an adaptation, much like any Disney movie that we get that is clearly just a means to get people to the box office, like Beauty and the Beast or Cinderella or any of those, you know, Disney movies that really don't need a live action adaptation. The Avatar The Last Airbender felt like it kind of fit a similar ticket, which is why I feel like it's important for shows that adapt to add new content that complements the existing story, because otherwise you're just making a cash grab. There's really no purpose to that film existing or show or whatever, you know. So I have to say that I did appreciate that they wanted to try to innovate the story, and it's actually something that, looking back at, you know, M. Night's The Last Airbender movie, that you can to a degree appreciate, is that, you know, he changed some of the rules of the world. Like he changed the firebending, like where they don't generate the fire, they have to pull from, you know, the torches or the. I think it's a way that the person adapting can add or enrich the existing canon of the show. Now, whether to say it did or not, you know, I think that's up to the viewer. I think another good example of that is The Last of Us on HBO, where they made some very clear choices creatively that sort of change the source material a little bit, where they make some clear creative decisions that are obviously different from the source material. I don't think that that's a bad thing to do necessarily. So overall, I would say that I watched the show and it was palatable. You know, it was like, if somebody asked me, was it good? I would say it's all right. There's definitely things that fall flat in The Last Airbender as a show that don't necessarily in the cartoon, but I went in knowing I was going to cut season 1 some slack, because season 1 of the cartoon is pretty lackluster when you go back and look at it. And I knew that from a pretty young age, that like this was before they knew the show was really going to go anywhere. And I think that once they were greenlit for season 2, it was kind of that moment where they were like, oh, we can buckle down on this, because that the show didn't really stop talking down to its audience until like season 2. And I think that when they made that shift, that was where I, as a fan, was fully on board. I mean, I remember liking it in season 1, but I want to say that it was like the Blind Bandit episode. There was something about that episode that was just magical, that took me as the viewer and just whisked me away into their beautiful Last Airbender sunset. I think one of the reasons that I will only go as far to say that I found it palatable was that I think the biggest mark that they missed was the pacing of the show. They didn't really feel like they had that section mapped out, which was kind of hard to get into as a viewer. One of those things was, and they did it for the time that they had. They had 8-hour-long episodes, and so what they ended up having to do was they had to write, 2 or 3 episodes into one episode. And to do that, in certain cases, they had to kind of shift different stories that happened in different places geographically into one. And, you know, on one hand, I don't want to spoil, but at the same time, I'm just going to say, like, if you don't want spoilers, probably stop now. But episode 3 of the show, they put King Boomy and the Western Air Temple and Jet into one episode. So you have these 3 majorly different storylines that really require the entire cast in terms of like shot by shot adaptation. Like we miss some of the magic that happens in the cartoon, I think. But in the same breath, I don't think that they do a poor job of that episode in particular adapting the episodes to each other and finding a way to make them work together. And part of that is, you know, like having the professor from the Western Air Temple, now he's in Omashu, and so it's like we need to find a way to make him and his situation conflict with the extremism of the freedom fighters and Jet. You know, that ends up splitting the party, so to speak. So it creates a different kind of show. It just felt like there were times that changed the pacing itself, especially as we got closer to the end of the show, because we're really just like go, go, go on the plot points. So it was almost breakneck speed for most of the show up until the point that it just wasn't. And so, I mean, it's like we come to this, you know, super abrupt halt. And I guess also it just feels a little aimless too, because the material being changed in the first place, you have like, you know, Aang needs to master waterbending. Like that's kind of the reason that he sets out in the first place in the original show. But in this show, like we know that he needs to master waterbending. And the reason that Katara wants to go with him in the first place is that they can find her a master to master waterbending. I think we lose a little bit of the drive with the characters because we go back to the Southern Air Temple and then we immediately from there start heading north to the Water Tribe. And we make all these stops along the way, especially to speak to past avatars in their shrines, which takes us to Kyoshi Island in the second episode. Really, I don't know. I guess in the show, it was just supposed to be a goofy little pit stop to ride the elephant koi in the lake, but then it turns into being captured by the Kyoshi warriors, and then, you know, and then it turns out okay because he's the avatar and da-da-da-da-da. But in the show, it was more like they were just kind of there stopping in. Like there wasn't anything that they were there to do in particular. There was no choice being made to put them there, I guess, outside of just stopping there and resting, you know, which is like, I can relate to that idea. Like if I'm on a road trip, I don't necessarily plan out every place I'm going to stop. You know, every place I stop doesn't necessarily have a purpose outside of resting. But I think in terms of the show, that was kind of Aang's whole character in the original, was that he wanted to have fun and he wanted to experience the world and, you know, stretch his muscles, warm up a little bit. And, you know, he's been in a block of ice for 100 years. So I think throughout the whole show, we kind of had this weird skipping stone pacing to the show where it's like, well, you're here now. And there's not really, you know, a huge reason, but like, you know, but you're here because you have to be. I think that they do a decent job later in the show with giving reasons to be in different places, but it just, I guess, maybe felt like the writing wasn't totally unified, because later in the season there's an episode where they, instead of having just Sokka get trapped in the spirit world and then have Aang go and save him, they get Sokka and Katara trapped in the spirit world. And that's, you know, that's where he has to go and help Haybot. And they end up bringing a lot more of the spirit world into the episode, but since it's an hour long, they've got to kind of pad for time and figure this all out. And so they give us a few other pieces of exposition throughout that episode to kind of get us ready for later. The biggest pacing issue I really had in the whole show was that in that episode, Aang needs to go talk to Roku. And to talk to Roku, he has to go to the Fire Nation to go talk to Roku, which, in all fairness, does happen in the show. Like, they go to that temple in the Fire Nation, but it's a different episode entirely. So to have him go from this backwater town to have to go take his glider to the Fire Nation, it just felt really far away. And maybe I just missed something. Maybe there was something that wasn't super in my face, and maybe they did say they were next to the Fire Nation in that episode. But like, to me, we just went from Omashu to the Fire Nation. So like, in terms of what my brain remembers of the map, it didn't feel like it was that close. And I could be wrong. And I'm willing to say that I'm wrong if I am. But it just felt really far away for him to go there and then to come back. So I don't know. There were just weird pacing moments like that. And since Aang was super serious the whole time and he was like, well, I got to master waterbending. And it's like, well, okay, well, we've been watching Katara learn from the scroll that she didn't steal from the pirates in this show, but she got from her grandma. We've been watching her get better at this. So why is Aang not getting better at his waterbending while she is? Because it's like, you could do that. There were times that she was practicing waterbending. It could have been an Aang and Katara scene to practice waterbending. Like that was something that was missing from the whole season. And that's one of the valid critiques that I hear from a lot of people that are really upset with the show, is that Aang didn't do any waterbending for the entirety of season 1, which is kind of strange. I would be a little put off if we got a second season and, you know, it's called Earth and he's supposed to learn how to earthbend and then he doesn't earthbend for the whole season. Like, that would be kind of strange. So it definitely is off to a strange start that I hope course corrects. The showrunners need to get more episodes to a season because their pacing is really jarring right now. But there's like, I don't know, I think there are some really good things that are coming out of the show. I think that Iroh and Zuko's scenes have been consistently good. Some were even better than good. I would say brilliant at some points. I think that they do a decent job at conveying those two characters. I think that I can't think of an actor who is playing a Fire Nation character that was disappointing in their performance. And particularly, Paul Sun-Young Lee is... I can't say that I've ever seen a character portrayal that I was super impressed by with him, but I feel like he really fit the Iroh ticket well, and he just kind of let the part take over. Which was really cool to see because, you know, we've seen him. I've seen him most prominently in Star Wars. I know he's done other work, but I've never really resonated with his portrayals. He always feels a little forced, but I feel like he did a good job in Avatar as Iroh. I thought that it was a good fit, and he just kind of was himself. Obviously the character was a little different, but I thought that he brought the right part of himself to that role where it just felt like a natural performance. And maybe I don't know if he has kids or, you know, a nephew or whatever that he was really projecting into this role, but he makes it look like he does because he just seems like he is the uncle of Zuko in the show. And I think Zuko was solid. And the person who I was the most impressed with consistently was Elizabeth Yu as Azula. Was awesome. I was consistently impressed with her. And Daniel Day Kim as Fire Lord Ozai. I mean, I just was like, there were no performances in the Fire Nation cast that I was disappointed with. I thought that they all did really, really well. If you want anybody to do well, you probably want your villains to do well. But that leads me over to one of my other complaints, was that in the show, it felt like there were just times where we were lacking urgency severely. And I didn't like that. And I mean, it's like, it's such a, I don't even know like where to start with that. Just maybe in the first episode with Sokka and Katara, where there were just kind of moments where I feel like a character would feel a little more here, or just emote a little more here. And the person who seemed to struggle with this the most was, I hope I'm saying her name right, Teoh, the girl that plays Katara. There were just times where she had things that felt like they needed emotion behind them, or needed urgency, or just, I don't know, like anger or despair or whatever. And it was just always the same kind of like, okay, I'm going to say "ang" really loud, but like also not very loud either. And I'm willing to cut the cast some slack because they're all young actors. I really look at that as more of a fault on the director, because to me, you know, you have all of these other things in place and you just consistently can't get what you're looking for out of this character. And I can't make any full examples of like other times that maybe she did pull that off, but I feel like there were certain points where we got the performance out of her, you know, so like it just felt more like a director that maybe didn't know how to work with the actors. But at the same time, you know, actors getting paid to be an actor in the show. So like also it's a shared, I think that's a shared responsibility on both parts. She has a really hard time with that. And to be Katara, you have to have that emotion behind the character. I remember growing up and everybody was like, oh, Katara's so whiny. I never understood that because she's just a very passionate individual. And so to have a character being adapted to not have that passion of the original, it does come across as that whiny character that people are like, all right, I'm just not going to listen to you. So I hope that she comes into this role a little more. I hope she really blooms as the show goes on, hopefully. One of the other things that was kind of bugging me performance-wise was Aang and Sokka have a really huge mumbling problem, or like they don't enunciate very well. And so there were times that it was like they said something or they would ask a question. What did you say? You know, and at first I was like, well, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know what any of these actors sound like, you know, off camera. Maybe there's some accenting going on that I'm missing. And no, I mean, it's like they listen to them in interviews and like, I can understand them perfectly, you know? So, okay, why are we using takes that like have less than usable dialogue? And I can actually probably answer that question, because if you are just using the best thing that you got, it's because you probably have a bunch of people breathing down your neck and you're already, you know, working within huge confines. Or on the other side, maybe they don't care. That is possible too. I tend to err to the side of optimism and not the pessimistic side of they don't care, but it's on the table. I have to imagine that people would want to have the show do well enough that they would at least have another year or two of work, versus not caring enough to just make one season of a thing. So that's just my like film industry showing. I don't know. I don't think a lot of people like to be out of work, but that's just, you know, my 2 cents, as things have been kind of slow these last couple years. So, but that too, it's like, well, I don't know. You would think that maybe the writers would buckle down a little harder too, if that's the case. So I don't know. Who's to say, really? Who's to say? But all in all, I mean, I didn't really feel like the show was as offensive as some people tried to make it out to be. I think that The pacing had issues. I think that there were performance issues. So it's like, I don't know. If I had to place it on the Mandible meter, I'd probably call it like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. Maybe 6.5 because I go back and forth between the number. I wouldn't say don't watch it. I would say you should watch it and form your own opinions. But I think that anybody who watches a show setting out for it to be exactly like the show that they watched in the first place, I think that you are just setting yourself up for disappointment. There is nothing that you can gain from a show that is made exactly the way that it was before. Just rewatch the show or replay the game or do whatever the source material was, read the book again. It's not to say that these things can't be done well, and it's not wrong for you to want them to be done well. I want to make that clear. But if you are just setting out for it to be perfect and exactly the way you remember it or just the way you thought it would be, you are setting yourself up for disappointment and you're not going to have a good time. No matter what that show is, no matter what that movie is, no matter what that adaptation looks like, you are setting yourself up for a great disappointment that's just not worth being that angry about. It's not. Like, I'm speaking as somebody who, you know, from this show in particular, it's like, yeah, there were things that were disappointing that maybe they didn't replicate, but like, it's okay because the original exists and I'm going to rewatch the original anyway. Like, this isn't replacing anything. That's just my little parting thoughts there that you can have for free. So anyway, I think that's going to do it for today. I think maybe we went a little longer than what we usually shoot for. But anyway, thank you very much for tuning in this week. I will see you guys again next Friday, and we'll do this again. We probably won't talk about Avatar, but we'll talk about something. We'll talk about something. If you don't already, go check out some of the other things we're doing. We got our short form content going up on YouTube and Instagram and kind of TikTok. And then we're also streaming a couple times a week on Twitch. That was the reason that I started this podcast in the first place, was that I wanted to connect with my Twitch audience more. So twitch.tv/WesMandible. You can find me over there. We stream Mondays, Fridays, and sometimes Wednesdays. I know that I said that out of order, but it's because Monday and Fridays are the consistent days. And then Wednesdays just kind of happen when they can happen. So, but I like to critique movies. I like to pick things apart. I like to say whether I like something or not, or why I don't. And I'd love to hear why you don't or why you do. So please drop a comment. Anyway, this outro has gone super long. I'm going to leave right now. I'm barely even able to say that I just got here. I'll see you later.